The emergency lights cast a red glow across the broken corridors of Research Station Harmony as Chief Science Officer Zalthek pressed his 4 trembling hands against the communication panel. His blue-scaled skin was covered in scratches and burns from his desperate flight through the station. Behind him, the sounds of death echoed through the metal halls, screams that cut off suddenly, followed by wet, tearing noises and the horrible chittering of the creatures that had once been contained in the deepest levels of the facility. Zalthek had worked on Harmony Station for 12 cycles, studying the most dangerous specimens the galaxy had ever discovered. The Vex had been locked away in quantum containment fields, their biology analyzed by teams of scientists from a dozen different worlds. They were supposed to be safe. The containment protocols had been tested and retested. Nothing should have been able to breach those fields, but something had gone wrong 3 days ago. The power grid had fluctuated during a routine maintenance cycle, and in that brief moment when the containment fields had weakened, the Vex had broken free. What followed was not just escape. It was consumption on a scale that defied imagination. The Vex were not like other dangerous species the galaxy had encountered. Most predators killed to eat or to defend territory. The Vex consumed because it was their nature. They broke down organic matter at the molecular level, absorbing nutrients and using the raw materials to create more of themselves. A single Vex could become 10 within hours if it had enough biomass to feed on. 10 could become 100. 100 could become 1,000. Station Harmony had housed over 3,000 researchers, technicians, and support staff from 17 different species. Now Zalthek was alone, hiding in the communications center while the creatures that had once been his colleagues hunted through the corridors outside. He activated the emergency transmitter with shaking fingers. The device hummed to life, its quantum arrays reaching out across space to find any listening station within range. "This is Research Station Harmony broadcasting on all emergency frequencies," he whispered into the microphone, his translator working to convert his words into the universal distress language. "We are under attack by the Vex specimens. Containment has been breached. Repeat, the Vex have escaped containment and are consuming all organic matter in the station." The door to the communication center shuddered as something large struck it from the other side. Zalthek could hear claws scraping against metal, and a low hissing sound that made his blood freeze. The Vex had found him. "Please," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whoever receives this message must warn the galaxy. The Vex cannot be allowed to reach inhabited worlds. They will consume everything. Every living thing will become part of their swarm. This is Chief Science Officer Zalthek of the Alteran Republic. If anyone is listening, please send help. Please stop them before they spread beyond this system." The door buckled inward as massive claws tore through the reinforced metal. Through the growing gap, Zalthek could see eyes, dozens of them glowing with a sickly green light. The creature that had once been his research assistant Kevlon pushed its changed head through the opening. Its mouth had split into multiple sections, each lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth. Organic tubes writhed from its back, pumping fluids that hissed when they touched the floor. Zalthek kept transmitting even as the creature forced its way into the room. "The breeding rate is exponential. They adapt to consume any organic matter. Carbon-based, silicon-based, even synthetic organic compounds. Nothing can stop them once they reach critical mass. Warn everyone. Evacuate all systems within 50 light years. This is my final transmission." The creature that had been Kevlon lunged forward, and Zalthek's transmission cut to static. 47 light years away, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was working the night shift at Earth's Outer Rim Monitoring Station. The facility orbited beyond the edge of the solar system, its powerful arrays designed to intercept communications from across the galaxy. Most nights, Jake listened to routine cargo reports and diplomatic chatter. Tonight was different. The emergency beacon cut through the background noise like a scream. Jake's coffee cup hit the floor as he lunged for the control panel, his fingers dancing across the translation matrix as he tried to clean up the signal. The alien voice was desperate, terrified, and the words it spoke made Jake's skin crawl. He had read the classified reports about the Vex. Every human military officer above a certain clearance level had studied those files. The creatures had been discovered on a dead world in the Outer Rim 60 years ago. A Galactic Council expedition had found a planet that had once supported billions of inhabitants. Now it was nothing but bare rock and twisted metal. The only living things were the Vex, creatures that seemed to be made from the organic matter of everything they had consumed. The Council had managed to capture several specimens and had spent decades studying them in secure facilities. The official reports claimed the Vex were contained and posed no threat to galactic civilization. The unofficial reports that humans had acquired through various means painted a different picture. The Vex were not just dangerous. They were an extinction-level threat to all organic life in the galaxy. Jake immediately forwarded the transmission to Earth Command, flagging it with the highest priority codes. Within minutes, secure quantum channels were lighting up across Earth's military network. The transmission reached the Pentagon's Situation Room where Admiral Lisa Carter was reviewing fleet deployment reports. Admiral Carter had been expecting this day for over 20 years. Earth's intelligence networks had been tracking the Vex research project since its beginning. Human agents embedded in dozens of galactic institutions had been sending reports about containment breaches, failed experiments, and the growing arrogance of scientists who thought they could control forces beyond their understanding. She studied the tactical displays that showed Earth's hidden fleet positions. For 3 centuries, humanity had been preparing for the day when the galaxy's naive optimism would collide with reality. While other species built research stations and diplomatic outposts, humans had been constructing warships and weapons that would have terrified their galactic neighbors if they had known they existed. "Contact all fleet commanders," Admiral Carter ordered. "Authorization code Omega-7. It's time to show the galaxy what a Deathworld species looks like when you threaten our neighbors." The message went out on channels that officially did not exist, reaching ships that were not supposed to be there, carrying weapons that violated every galactic treaty on acceptable warfare. In the depths of Earth's oceans and hidden bases on the Moon, in facilities buried beneath miles of ice in Antarctica, the machinery of war began to wake up. The galaxy had always seen humans as peaceful traders and curious explorers. They were about to learn the truth. Humans were survivors from a world that had tried to kill them every day of their existence. They had evolved not just intelligence but the kind of cold, calculating brutality that came from being apex predators on a planet where everything else wanted them dead. The Vex had made a critical error. They had threatened the neighbors of a Deathworld species. Now they would face the consequences of that mistake. The Galactic Council had always considered Earth to be one of the most dangerous worlds in the known universe. The planet's surface was covered in deadly weather patterns that could destroy entire cities in minutes. Massive storms with winds that reached hundreds of kilometers per hour regularly swept across the continents. The ground itself could shake and split open without warning, swallowing buildings and people alike. The oceans were filled with creatures that could crush ships with their bare tentacles, while the land hosted predators that hunted in organized packs. Most civilized species would have died within days of landing on such a world. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on this nightmare planet had made them objects of curiosity throughout the galaxy. Galactic anthropologists had written countless studies about how these strange bipedal creatures had adapted to their hostile environment. They noted how humans had developed complex social structures based on cooperation and mutual defense. They observed how human technology had evolved to help them survive their planet's constant attempts to kill them. What the anthropologists had missed was the most important adaptation of all. Humans had not just learned to survive on a death world. They had learned to think like predators, to plan like survivors, and to fight like creatures who knew that losing meant extinction. In the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, Captain Roy Henderson received the activation codes that had been stored in quantum encrypted files for over 200 years. The USS Leviathan had been waiting in the abyssal depths since the day construction was completed, its crew in suspended animation, its systems running on minimal power to avoid detection by galactic sensors. Roy had volunteered for this assignment, knowing that he might spend his entire career waiting for orders that might never come. He had studied the intelligence reports about galactic threats, learned about species like the Vex, and understood that someday Earth might need to deploy weapons that the galaxy didn't know existed. The massive submarine began its ascent from depths that would crush any galactic vessel. At over 1 kilometer in length, the Leviathan was larger than most space stations. Its hull was covered in armor plating that could withstand the pressure of the deepest ocean trenches, while its weapon systems included technologies that human scientists had developed in secret over 3 centuries of preparation. As the Leviathan rose toward the surface, Similar scenes were playing out across Earth. In the Nevada desert, Colonel Amy Brooks stood in a command center buried beneath miles of sand and rock. The facility had been disguised as a geological research station for over 50 years, but its true purpose was far more deadly. Amy entered her authorization codes into a control system that had been waiting for this moment since the day it was built. Above her, massive hangar doors that had been hidden beneath artificial sand dunes began to open. The rumble of ancient machinery filled the underground. Chambers as weapons that had been stored in climate-controlled environments began to power up. The ships that emerged from the Nevada facility looked nothing like the vessels that humans had shown to galactic visitors. Those had been crude, simple designs that reinforced the galaxy's belief that human technology was primitive and non-threatening. The real human warships were sleek predators built for one purpose: to hunt and destroy threats to Earth and her people. At the South Pole, Dr. Ben Hughes watched as the ice shelf began to crack and split along predetermined lines. The Antarctic Research Station, that had operated openly for decades, was only the tip of a massive construction project that had been hidden beneath the ice for over a century. Ben had been one of the few people who knew the truth about the research station. While the public facilities studied climate patterns and ice formations, the secret levels below had been building a fleet of warships that incorporated technologies reverse-engineered from captured galactic vessels. The ice continued to break apart as huge sections of the polar cap lifted into the air, revealing the construction bays hidden beneath. Dozens of ships that had never appeared on any official registry began to power up their drives, their hulls gleaming with armor that could withstand the heat of stellar radiation. These were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers. They were instruments of war built by a species that understood that survival sometimes required the complete destruction of anything that threatened. General Rick Stone stood in the primary command center buried deep beneath the Colorado mountains, watching as status reports flooded in from hidden installations around the world. Each report confirmed what he had known for years. When the time came, Earth would be ready. Rick had spent his entire career preparing for this day. He had studied every galactic conflict, analyzed every known weapon system, and planned countermeasures for threats that most people couldn't imagine. The Vex were not the first extinction-level danger the galaxy had faced, and they would not be the last. The general looked at the tactical displays that showed the true strength of Earth's military forces. Hidden bases on the moon housed fighter squadrons that could operate in any environment. Orbital platforms disguised as communication satellites carried weapons that could sterilize entire continents. Mining facilities in the asteroid belt served as forward bases for ships that could reach any point in the solar system within hours. Operation Homecoming is authorized, Rick announced to his staff. Send the activation codes to all fleet commanders. It's time the galaxy learned what happens when you threaten the neighbors of a Deathworld species. The codes went out on quantum channels that bypassed galactic communication networks entirely. Human engineers had spent decades developing technology that could operate without detection by alien sensors. Every human ship that had ever been captured or destroyed had been designed to hide the true capabilities of human technology. Across Earth, men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment began to take their positions. Fighter pilots who had practiced combat maneuvers in secret underground facilities prepared to launch into space. Ship captains who had studied enemy tactics through stolen intelligence reports powered up vessels that officially didn't exist. The galaxy had always wondered why humans were so interested in military history, why they studied ancient battles and warfare tactics with such intensity. They had assumed it was just another curiosity of a species from a violent world. They had been wrong. Humans studied war because they knew that someday they would need to wage it. They had prepared for every possible threat, built weapons for every conceivable enemy, and trained soldiers for battles that might never come. The Vex outbreak was not unexpected, it was inevitable. Now, the galaxy would discover what 3 centuries of paranoid preparation could accomplish when guided by the survival instincts of apex predators from the most dangerous world in known space. Captain Helen Davis stood on the bridge of the EDS Retribution and looked out at the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled. The massive warship stretched 2 kilometers from its armored bow to its engine arrays, and it was just one of over 100 vessels that had emerged from their hidden bases across the solar system. The Retribution looked nothing like the sleek, elegant ships that other galactic species preferred. Where alien vessels curved and flowed like works of art, human warships were brutal and angular. Every surface was covered in overlapping armor, plates that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. Every weapon mount was designed to deliver maximum destruction with ruthless efficiency. Helen had commanded the Retribution for 15 years, even though the ship officially didn't exist. She had trained her crew in combat simulations based on intelligence gathered from every major galactic conflict of the past century. Her officers knew the capabilities and weaknesses of every known alien weapon system, and they had practiced fighting enemies that the rest of humanity had never heard of. The bridge around her hummed with quiet activity as her crew prepared for the jump to the Harmony Station system. Navigation Officer Tim Rodriguez checked and rechecked the hyperspace calculations that would take them across 47 light-years in a matter of hours. Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan ran diagnostics on weapon systems that violated every galactic treaty on acceptable warfare. Communications Officer Lisa Thompson monitored the secure channels that connected the Retribution to the rest of the human fleet. The ships maintained perfect radio silence on all frequencies that galactic sensors could detect, but they communicated constantly on quantum channels that alien technology couldn't intercept. Helen watched the tactical display that showed the positions of all human vessels in the fleet. Each ship had a specific role to play in the coming battle. Fast attack vessels would engage Vex fighters and clear paths for the capital ships. Heavy cruisers would target the main Vex installations with weapons designed to punch through planetary defenses. Support vessels carried enough ammunition and supplies to sustain combat operations for months if necessary. The diversity of the fleet would have surprised galactic military analysts. Humans had built ships for every possible combat scenario, from close quarters fighting in asteroid fields to long-range bombardment of fortified positions. They had studied every battle in recorded galactic history and designed counters for every tactic they had observed. "Captain," reported Science Officer Paul Grant from his station, "final intelligence reports are coming in from our deep space reconnaissance probes. The Vex have been busy at the Harmony Station. They've consumed the entire facility and are using the biomass to construct what appears to be a breeding complex." Helen studied the holographic images that the reconnaissance probes had transmitted. The Vex had transformed the research station into something that looked more like a living organism than a space facility. Organic growths covered the original metal structures, pulsing with veins that carried nutrients and genetic material throughout the complex. Smaller structures that might have been egg chambers or nurseries dotted the surface of the main installation. "How many Vex vessels are we looking at?" Helen asked. Paul manipulated the holographic display to highlight the enemy ships. "Approximately 200 contacts ranging from fighter-sized organisms to something that mass sensors indicate is larger than a heavy cruiser. The vessels appear to be grown rather than built, and they're all connected to the main breeding facility by organic tethers." Helen nodded grimly. The Vex had followed their expected behavior patterns exactly. They had consumed everything organic in the research station and used the biomass to create more of themselves. If left unchecked, they would soon have enough numbers to spread to other systems. "Tactical assessment, Commander Sullivan." Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan had been studying the enemy formations with the cold analysis of a professional killer. The Vex ships move in swarm patterns similar to insect behavior. They rely on overwhelming numbers rather than tactical sophistication. Their weapons appear to be biological rather than technological, some kind of organic projectile system, and what might be acid sprayers for close combat. Helen considered the tactical situation. The Vex had superior numbers, but they were fighting according to biological instincts rather than military doctrine. They had never encountered an enemy that understood their behavior patterns and had developed specific countermeasures. "Communications, open a channel to all fleet commanders," Helen ordered. Lisa Thompson's fingers danced over her control panel as she established secure connections to every ship in the human fleet. "Channel open, Captain." Helen looked out at the assembled warships one more time before speaking. "This is Captain Davis to all vessels. We are about to engage an enemy that has terrorized this galaxy for longer than recorded history. The Vex believe they are the ultimate predators, that nothing in the universe can stand against their hunger. She paused, thinking about the species they were about to protect. Most galactic civilizations had never experienced true warfare. They settled disputes through negotiation and compromise. They built their ships for exploration and trade, not combat. They had no concept of the kind of ruthless efficiency that evolution had bred into humanity during millions of years of survival on a world that constantly tried to kill them. Today we show them what it means to hunt a species from a death world, Helen continued. We are not diplomats or explorers or merchants, we are apex predators, and we have been preparing for this moment for 300 years. The Vex have made the mistake of threatening our neighbors. We will ensure they do not get the chance to make that mistake again. The fleet jumped as one, disappearing into hyperspace with a precision that would have impressed galactic military observers. Each ship followed a slightly different route to the target system, designed to bring them all into combat range simultaneously, while making it impossible for enemy forces to predict their arrival points. Behind them, Earth's defensive systems powered up to full readiness. If somehow the Vex managed to follow the human fleet back to the solar system, they would find not a defenseless world, but a fortress that had been preparing for invasion since the day humans learned they were not alone in the universe. The orbital defense platforms that most aliens assumed were communication satellites revealed their true nature as weapons capable of sterilizing continents. The asteroid mining facilities deployed fighter squadrons that could intercept incoming threats anywhere in the solar system. Even Earth's moon opened hidden hangar bays and launched patrol vessels to secure the inner system. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had been quarantined for so long, and why every human they had ever met had been so interested in their military capabilities and defensive strategies. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Harmony system, and immediately every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings. What had once been a single research station floating peacefully in space was now something that belonged in the nightmares of every species in the galaxy. The Vex had been busy during the 3 days since their escape. The original station structure was barely visible beneath layers of organic growth that pulsed with sickly green light. Massive tendrils reached out in all directions from the central mass, some of them stretching for dozens of kilometers through space. At the end of each tendril was a smaller structure that looked like it might be some kind of egg chamber or nursery. Captain Helen Davis studied the tactical display on the bridge of the Retribution while her crew worked around her with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had trained for this moment their entire careers. The Vex complex was even worse than their worst-case projections had predicted. Sensor analysis report, Helen ordered. Science Officer Paul Grant looked up from his instruments with an expression that mixed disgust with professional interest. The Vex have consumed approximately 90% of the original station mass and converted it into what appears to be a biological factory. The central structure is producing new Vex organisms at an exponential rate. I'm detecting birthing chambers, nutrient processing centers, and what might be genetic modification laboratories. Helen felt the cold anger that came when she thought about the 3,000 researchers who had died to feed this monstrosity. Those scientists had been trying to understand the Vex in order to protect the galaxy from them. Instead, their work had given the creatures exactly what they needed to begin spreading across inhabited space. "How many enemy vessels?" she asked. Tactical Officer Kate Sullivan manipulated the sensor display to highlight the Vex ships that moved around the breeding complex, like antibodies protecting a diseased organ. 217 contacts ranging from fighter analogs roughly the size of our interceptors to several massive vessels that mass out at heavy cruiser equivalent. The ships appear to be grown rather than built, and they're all connected to the central complex by organic tethers. Helen studied the enemy formation with the eye of a predator sizing up her prey. The Vex ships moved in patterns that reminded her of insect swarms or fish schools. There was no visible command structure, no tactical coordination beyond basic biological instincts. They had evolved to overwhelm prey through sheer numbers rather than sophisticated military planning. That was going to be their weakness. Communications, signal all fleet commanders. We execute Battle Plan Delta on my mark. Lisa Thompson's fingers moved across her control panel as she transmitted the coded orders to every ship in the human fleet. Battle Plan Delta was one of dozens of tactical scenarios that human military planners had developed specifically for fighting swarm-based enemies. Every captain in the fleet had run Simulations of this exact situation hundreds of times. The human ships began to move into attack formation, with a precision that would have impressed galactic military observers. Unlike the chaotic swarm patterns of the Vex, the human vessels moved with calculated efficiency. Each ship knew exactly where it needed to be and exactly what targets it needed to engage. Fighter wings launched from the larger vessels and spread out in a protective screen around the capital ships. Fast attack cruisers moved to flank positions where they could hit Vex formations from multiple angles simultaneously. The heavy battleships like the Retribution took central positions where their massive weapons could reach any part of the enemy complex. "All ships report ready for engagement," Lisa announced. Helen looked out at the Vex breeding facility one more time, thinking about all the worlds that would die if these creatures were allowed to spread beyond this system. The galaxy's civilized species had no concept of the kind of threat they were facing. They thought in terms of negotiation and compromise, not total warfare and species extinction. "Execute Battle Plan Delta," Helen ordered. "All ships weapons-free. Primary target is the central breeding facility. Deny them their production capability and the swarm becomes manageable." The human fleet opened fire with a coordination that turned space into a light show of destruction. Railgun rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed punched through Vex bioships like bullets through paper. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than the cores of most stars carved glowing wounds through enemy formations. Missile swarms sought out targets with artificial intelligence that had been programmed to recognize and exploit Vex biological weaknesses. The Vex responded exactly as human tactical analysis had predicted. The creatures had no concept of tactical withdrawal or strategic planning. When attacked, their biological programming demanded that they swarm toward the threat with overwhelming numbers. It was an effective strategy against most galactic species, who would panic when faced with hundreds of organic ships charging directly at their formations. But humans were not most galactic species. They were apex predators from a world where everything had tried to kill them for millions of years. They had evolved not just intelligence, but the kind of cold, calculating ruthlessness that came from surviving in an environment where a single mistake meant death. Fighter pilot. Lieutenant Sam Parker pulled his interceptor into a steep dive toward a cluster of Vex biofighters. His weapon systems locked onto targets that moved like living things through space. The enemy vessels writhed and twisted as they tried to avoid his fire. But Sam had been training for this kind of combat since he was old enough to hold a control stick. His plasma cannons spoke in brief, precise bursts that turned Vex fighters into clouds of organic debris. Each shot was calculated to cause maximum damage while conserving ammunition for the long battle ahead. Sam had studied the behavioral patterns of every known space-based organism, and he knew exactly how these creatures would react to each maneuver he made. The battle spread across the entire Harmony system as human ships engaged Vex bio-vessels in running firefights that stretched from the inner planets to the outer asteroid belts. Everywhere the pattern was the same. Vex numbers against human precision, biological instinct against military training, evolutionary adaptation against 3 centuries of paranoid preparation. The outcome was never really in doubt. The Vex had evolved to consume and overwhelm, but they had never faced a species that understood their nature and had spent generations preparing specifically to fight them. Every Vex tactic had been anticipated. Every biological weapon had been countered. Every swarm pattern had been analyzed and defeated in simulation. The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. The Vex threw everything they had at the human fleet, sending wave after wave of bioships against formations that refused to break under pressure. Every time a Vex swarm charged toward the human vessels, they met walls of precisely coordinated fire that turned their organic hulls into drifting clouds of debris. Captain Helen Davis watched from the bridge of the Retribution as her weapons officers systematically dismantled the Vex breeding facility. The massive railguns that ran along the ship's spine fired rounds that punched completely through the organic structure, sending shockwaves through the entire complex. Each hit caused sections of the facility to convulse and die, cutting off the flow of nutrients that kept the Vex reproduction cycle running. The central breeding chamber had been the primary target from the beginning. Human intelligence had determined that without their ability to rapidly reproduce, the Vex would become just another dangerous but manageable threat. The key was to destroy their production capability before they could reach the critical mass needed to spread to other star systems. Direct hit on the primary berthing structure. Reported Weapons Officer Kate Sullivan as another. Railgun round found its mark. Internal explosions detected throughout the target. The organic framework is collapsing. Helen nodded with grim satisfaction. The Vex had made the same mistake that countless predators had made when facing humans throughout history. They had assumed that their natural advantages would be enough to guarantee victory. They had never encountered a species that studied their enemies with scientific precision and then built weapons specifically designed to exploit every weakness. Fighter pilot. Lieutenant Sam Parker was finishing his third pass through a cluster of Vex biofighters when he noticed something that made him pause. The enemy vessels were no longer attacking with the mindless aggression they had shown at the beginning of the battle. Instead, they seemed to be trying to retreat toward the outer edges of the system. "Control, this is Parker," he reported over the secure communication channel. "The Vex are changing their behavior. They're not swarming anymore. It looks like they're trying to escape." The response came back immediately from the Fleet Tactical Center. "Confirmed, Parker. All units are reporting the same pattern. The Vex are attempting to disengage and flee the system." Captain Davis received the same reports on the bridge of the Retribution. The Vex bioships were breaking off from combat and accelerating toward the edge of the system where they could jump into hyperspace. It was exactly what human battle planners had expected would happen once the breeding facility was destroyed. "All units, execute pursuit protocols," Helen ordered. "Do not let any Vex vessels escape this system. If even one of them reaches an inhabited world, we could be facing this same situation again within months." The human fleet shifted from defensive formations to pursuit mode with the same mechanical precision they had shown throughout the battle. Fast attack vessels and fighter squadrons spread out in a net, designed to intercept fleeing Vex ships before they could reach safe jumping distance. Capital ships moved to block the most likely escape routes while launching long-range missiles at targets that were trying to flee. The chase continued for another 2 hours as human vessels hunted down the last scattered Vex bioships. Each enemy vessel that was destroyed brought the galaxy one step closer to safety from a threat that could have consumed every living world in known space. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched the battle reports from his monitoring station at the edge of the solar system. The same facility that had first detected the distress signal from Research Station Harmony was now tracking the systematic destruction of the Vex threat. Every few minutes, another enemy contact disappeared from the sensor displays as human weapons found their targets. Jake thought about the galactic species who had no idea what was happening in the Harmony system. Merchant captains and diplomatic couriers were going about their normal business, completely unaware that they had just been saved from an extinction-level threat by the military forces of a world that most of them considered primitive and harmless. Unknown to the human fleet, their battle was being observed by survivors from a dozen different species. Captain Veltar of the Centaurian Trade Federation had been hiding in the outer system when the Vex outbreak began. Too terrified to approach the infected research station, but unable to jump away, without knowing what had happened to his cargo, Contrax Veltar watched through his ship's sensors as vessels emerged from hyperspace in formations that spoke of military discipline and tactical sophistication. At first, he had assumed they were Galactic Council forces responding to the emergency. Then he had seen the angular, brutal design of the ships and realized that these were not vessels from any known galactic navy. The battle that followed changed everything Veltar thought he knew about the galaxy. The mysterious fleet didn't just defeat the Vex, they annihilated them with a precision and efficiency that spoke of extensive preparation and deep understanding of the enemy. Every Vex tactic was countered, every biological weapon was neutralized, every attempt at escape was blocked. When the last Vex bioship died under a barrage of plasma fire, Veltar transmitted his report to the Galactic Council with hands that shook from more than just fear. "Council Central, this is Captain Veltar reporting a Code Black scenario at Research Station Harmony. The Vex containment has been breached and the entire facility has been consumed." He paused, trying to find words for what he had witnessed. "However, the Vex threat has been neutralized by an unknown military force. The vessels responsible appear to be of human origin, but their capabilities far exceed any known human technology. Council members, we may have been sharing space with a species that has been deliberately concealing their true military strength. Back on Earth, Admiral Lisa Carter received the final battle reports in her command center beneath the Colorado mountains. The Vex threat had been eliminated with minimal human casualties. More importantly, the operation had been conducted with enough precision that very few galactic observers had been present to witness the true capabilities of the human fleet. Operation Homecoming is complete, Admiral Carter announced to her staff. All human vessels are to return to their assigned patrol areas and resume normal operations. The galaxy is safe from the Vex threat. She looked at the tactical displays that showed human ships beginning their journey back to hidden bases throughout the solar system. The fleet would disappear as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only debris fields and confused reports from alien observers who couldn't quite believe what they had seen. The message was clear to anyone with the intelligence to understand it. Earth had been content to trade and explore peacefully with its galactic neighbors. But when those neighbors were threatened by forces beyond their ability to handle, humanity would respond with the full fury of a Deathworld species that had spent centuries preparing for exactly this kind of threat. The Vex had learned too late what it meant to threaten the neighbors of apex predators from the most dangerous world in the galaxy.